And there's a few things that I want to go over that we can talk about. Wait, let me get rid of this. So what I'm trying to do here is apply science to different things. So magnetite is the most magnetic naturally occurring mineral on Earth. It's this black, brownish black looking thing. It's extremely hard. And here's its formula. Okay, so you look at this formula, you would be confused because there's a 4 here. Where'd that 4 come from? Well, it came from the iron, but iron does not do a +4. Similarly, oxygen doesn't do a -3. So this would totally confuse people. So what magnetite really is a combination of 2 different chemicals. Here's iron 2 oxide, and here's iron 3 oxide. Okay. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. Sometimes you will see stuff like this that doesn't make sense. It has to be broken down into something that's more understandable. So as someone who teaches, I would never write it this way, but that's the way you see it. So it's interesting that magnetite has given a lot of information to geologists and even biologists because we can read it, we can see it, we can find out which direction the magnetic fields are going. So we've found that if you look at plate tectonics where it's magma is coming up like this and causing it to spread. So you have molten rock coming out and then it hardens. But the magnetite within that molten rock is going to align with the magnetic field of planet Earth. So when we look at that, we find out that the Earth's magnetic poles have switched several times. Here's the timeline, okay, which is kind of a mind blower. How does that happen? And I don't know if you guys are that much into biology of, I don't know, Hawaiian biology, whatever you want to call it, but if you guys know what OPE are, so there's these cone-like, shell-like things that stick to the rocks, and local people like to eat them. I didn't eat them for a long, long time, and I was really looking forward to eating them one time. And then finally, when I got to eat them after a long, long time, I was like, okay, why was I waiting for that? That's terrible. But anyway, they make their living scraping biological materials off of rocks with essentially their tongue. So on their tongue is these little pieces of magnetite that it uses to scrape stuff off of the rocks. So I've always wondered if you could actually have a really strong magnet and then just pull an OPE right off the rocks with it. I mean, I'm sure you couldn't do it once they've sucked down into defensive mode, but anyway. And then we have lots of bird species that are long distance migrants. And in the past couple of decades, people have realized that they have what's called magnetoreception. They can actually detect the field lines on planet Earth. And so I've read conflicting stuff in the newspaper, but see this bird right here? That's like my favorite bird. That's the Colea, also known as Pacific golden plover. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. I mean, I was just in awe of them. You know, you're on the North Shore and the huge giant waves are out there and you see this giant shore break coming in. It's like, oh my God, that Colea is going to get murdered by it. And it just runs out of the way. It's like inches away from the water. But anyway, they migrate between here and Alaska. They spend most of their time here. They breed and stuff in Alaska. So how do they get here? Well, they have to be taught how far to fly, what to look for. They have landmarks and look at all kinds of stuff. When they fly at night, they're obviously looking at the moon and stars, but what happens when they can't see anything? They believe they can actually see the magnetic field lines of the Earth. So they have found magnetite crystals in the system, in their nervous system, in their central nervous system, part of the forebrain. So once they saw that in birds, they started looking in other organisms, and they found magnetoreception, and probably looks like it's probably going to end up in almost anything. I remember the first time they ever tagged a tiger shark in Hawaii. It was right off of Kewalo, and the boat that they do that research in is, I can look out my window over here and see it right there. It's like a Boston whaler looking type of thing. As soon as they tagged it, that tiger shark went right to Maui. It's like it went in a straight line from Oahu to Maui. How did it get there? Well, they believe it's magnetoreception. So these birds fly 3,000 miles nonstop. If they stop or they try to land on water, that's it. They're done. They can't take off from water. So that's one interesting thing about iron. And here's another interesting thing about iron that should be very important to you. Iron deficiency is probably the most important problem in nutrition right now. People don't get it. A lot of nutritionists don't get it. Dietitians don't get it. The reason why they don't get it is because oftentimes people think that iron can be toxic in large amounts. So there is a disease where people have a storage issue with iron, where they actually get too much iron and it becomes toxic. But that's rare, a rare genetic disease. And for the most part, people need to get iron because iron is involved in so many biological processes, it's ridiculous. Here's the problem. You can only absorb small amounts of iron from the diet. Absorption of iron supplements, which are mostly iron sulfate, is less than 20% efficient. Absorption of heme iron, which is the best source, most absorbable, like you get from red meat, is only about 35% efficient. The non-heme iron that you find in plants is much less readily absorbed. So especially if you are a vegetarian, you should consider taking iron supplements. So here's the problem. Iron has to be in the +2 state to be absorbed. So say you get the food that has iron in it and it's in the +3 state. There's an enzyme that you need to reduce it to iron +3. Excuse me, +2. And then it goes absorbed into the intestinal epithelial cell by the divalent cation transport protein, which I tried to depict here, these two blue ovals. So here's the problem with that. This is not specific to iron. It transports any ion that's divalent. So that means that iron has to compete with calcium and zinc and magnesium. And especially because a lot of people take calcium supplements. If you take a calcium supplement, your intestines are going to be flooded with calcium. Good luck trying to get that iron in there. And foods have all these things, right? So that's the problem with getting enough iron. So then what has to happen to it? Well, it gets converted, into the +3 state and is stored in a protein called ferritin. Then if you want to get it out of the intestinal epithelial cell and get it into circulation, then it has to be taken out of the cell through another transport protein called ferroportin, and then it's reduced to iron plus 2 again before it can be absorbed by ferritin in another cell. So that's the problem. It's very difficult to absorb because there is no transporter specifically for that. Now, most of the time when people get their blood taken and they get tested for iron, what they're looking at is serum ferritin. And serum ferritin values show that it gives you a very, very false, what's the word for it? The values for serum ferritin are wrong. So here's lots of data to show that. It's come out recently. And so anyway, just because you may test okay for iron in the blood test, it does not mean that you're not iron deficient. Think about your body, for example. You need hemoglobin. If you don't have hemoglobin, you can't do anything. You can't run away from the predator. You can't, run down the street. You can't catch an elevator. So therefore, the very last place your body is going to have deficiency in iron is going to be in your blood, at the expense oftentimes of internal stores, which is really what we should be looking at. So anyway, here's a toolkit how to figure out whether you're iron deficient or not. And then I just got through telling you that the best place to get to absorb iron is from red meat. But then again, everything should be done in moderation. And so consumptions of high amounts of red meat is associated with increases in heart disease and all kinds of other stuff. Here's a bunch of information about that. And so when you put meat into just the category of being meat, then you have problems because not all meat is the same. So processed meats contain nitrates and nitrites, especially in these kinds of foods, that increase cancers of the colon, pancreas, and all this kind of stuff. So it might not be so much that you shouldn't eat meat. It should be that maybe you shouldn't eat some of the processed meats. But right now, the data doesn't discern from that, except in cases where people have actually looked at it.
Does that include ground meat, like in hamburgers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Ground hamburger is red meat.
No, I mean, is it processed? I mean, would it fit in the
No,
category?
that's not processed. So it's not cured or anything, right?
Okay, thank goodness.
So that's like with nitrites and nitrates.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, I put some information in here that you might be interested in. And then salt. Salt is another thing. So after many conversations with my nutritionist friends, I actually started getting and looking up the data. And here's what I found. I was in the Army in 1971. And whenever we did something extremely strenuous, they would tell us, oh, go to your C rations, take out your salt pills and eat them. They put salt pills in C rations back then. What the salt does is that when you sweat a lot, you lose salt. Then if you drink water, you're not replacing that salt. So salt also helps you retain water. You don't sweat as much. So anyway, I asked recently Army guys, well, what do you guys do for salt? How do you replenish your electrolytes? And by the way, you know what normal IV solution is? It's 0.9% sodium chloride. So I asked the recent guys, well, what do you guys do? So, oh, we drink Gatorade. It's like, what? When I was in the Army, there was no Gatorade, and you were just basically on your own. So there was 2 research observations made in 1972. So they looked at different populations, and they found that some populations, especially in the Mediterranean, had low incidence of heart disease. So one of their observation was that, oh, these people are not using as much sodium chloride on their foods. So it was a correlation made. And then somebody said, well, let's verify that. So they took lab rats and they fed them 60 times the amount of salt found in the American diet. And guess what? They actually developed hypertension, which is high blood pressure. 60 times the amount of salt found in the American diet? That's ridiculous. They probably had all kinds of other issues because of that salt. But regardless, I almost guarantee if you go to your doctor and say, you know, doctor, I really love salt in my food. I'm constantly craving salt. You're probably going to say, well, that's really bad. That causes high blood pressure. But all the data since then has said that there isn't a correlation between salt intake and hypertension. But right now, the RDA is about 2.4 grams a day, and the FDA and the USDA are advocating to raise it a little bit, but that's still only half a teaspoon a day. So a huge study in 1991 said that we need like twice that much a day, at least. So what happens if you eat a bunch of salty food? What does your body tell you to do? Drink water, right? So you drink water, and what does that do? It makes you urinate, which means you get rid of all that excess salt. So if you have normal kidney function, too much salt is not a problem. What if you don't have enough salt? There's no way for you to suddenly have enough salt. So what that does is it causes your body to release all kinds of hormones, all designed to help you retain the salt, and that's where the problem comes from. So in a 2011 study, they found that the risk of heart disease was 56% higher for a low salt group compared to a high salt group. And there's been all kinds of stuff published, but to this day, I don't see anybody changing. Here's the state of modern day social media and all this kind of stuff. So recently I was in the food store with my wife, and she told me to go get something from the vegetable part. I don't forget what it was, but you know, she told me to do it, so I got to do it. She's the boss. So there's these 2 girls over there. I can't say how prejudiced this sounds, but they just seemed like they were HPU students to me. They had obviously had a lot of money. They talked like they did. Anyway, so the one girl grabs some salt, and the other girl goes, "Don't take that poison. That salt is poison. There's iodine in there. It's poisonous." And at that point, I thought, well, I'm the professor. I should explain this to them. Then I thought to myself, it's like, I don't think I'm going to get anywhere with it. So why do they put iodine in table salt? It's because iodine deficiency affects 2 billion people worldwide. That's the reason. So regular salt does not have iodine. It's processed. Sea salt has trace amounts of iodine. So if you eat seafood and stuff like that, you're unlikely to get low amounts of iodine. But if you're like in the middle of some landmass and you don't eat a lot of seafood, then you could very well become iodine deficient. And that has been a problem. But now, for some reason, those girls, which kind of exemplify what social media does. Oh my God, iodine is toxic. It's a poison. Republicans put it there. And then another thing, I want to go into high fructose corn syrup, because high fructose corn syrup has been, what's the word for it? Blamed, I guess, for all the world's health issues. And so I thought I would kind of try to explain this. So how do you get corn syrup? What is it? So it's starch, which is a complex sugar. Then upon digesting that starch, you hydrolyze it into smaller polysaccharides using an enzyme called amylase. Amylase is found in your mouth, your saliva, and then also in the small intestine. So here's starch and amylase. And so this circle right here represents glucose. And so if I take starch and glycogen and I break it down, I get maltose, which then can be broken down into glucose. And it's basically 100% glucose. It's a complex sugar, and it doesn't raise your glycemic value very quickly, so it has a low glycemic index because it takes time to digest it. It's only the individual monosaccharides that are absorbed by your intestines. This cannot be absorbed. Even that cannot be absorbed. Sucrose cannot be absorbed. So anyway, here's maltose. Malt sugar is completely glucose. Here's sucrose. Is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. So common table sugar is 50% fructose. Make sense? So how do they make high fructose corn syrup? So this is not GMO, it is simply biotechnology. They take a column and they take a slurry that's 100% glucose and they pass it through this column, and the enzyme will convert some of it into fructose in a chemical reaction, which is a completely natural reaction. This enzyme came from a plant. So if you run it through the column once, you'll get a mixture of 42% fructose and 58% glucose. So that's known as high fructose corn syrup 42, slightly less sweet than sucrose. So then they might want to take that high fructose corn syrup 42 and purify it with another column. They can get it quite easily up to 90% fructose. The other glucose, they simply run right back through the column. So now that you have 90% high fructose corn syrup, it's very sweet, but now you can dilute it into different things for different purposes. So what's used in carbonated beverages like Coke is high fructose corn syrup 55. Okay. So, anyway, why would we be doing all this stuff? Here's the relative sweetness for sugars and sweeteners. Look at fructose. Fructose is the sweetest of the sugars. Compare that to, where are we? Glucose, for example. It's like fructose is twice as sweet. It's almost twice as sweet as sucrose. So that means when you put it into a Coke, for example, or some beverage, you don't have to put as much. So that's where high fructose corn syrup comes from. This is the reason why they do it, because fructose is simply so sweet. So let me pose a question to you. Most people nowadays are drinking diet soda. Why? Because they're trying to avoid the calories. When you take carbon dioxide and dissolve it into water to make a drink, that drink now is extremely bitter because it's acidic. So you have to put a bunch of sucrose in there to overcome that bitterness from the acidity. Then you have to put a whole bunch more in there to make it actually sweet. So you're going to save a lot of money for the company and a lot of calories for the consumer by using fructose instead of sucrose. By the way, about maybe 30 years ago, I don't remember how long ago. What's time anyway? I remember going to a health food store, just looking around, and this girl comes up to me, totally hippied out, works there, and she was trying to tell me fructose. Oh, don't take sucrose because that's processed. You should take fructose because it's natural. It's found in fruit sugar. But anyway, now things are quite different. Anything with fructose is bad. So the early human diets contained almost no fructose because there were no refined sugars. Fruits and even dried fruits were less than 10% fructose. So that would be the max, a dried fruit, 10% fructose. Cultivation of sugarcane really started happening in the 1400s. It was extremely expensive. And in the 1500s, the Portuguese brought sugarcane to Brazil. The Dutch brought cane to the Caribbean. And now you needed people to grow this stuff. So therefore, you had to get slaves. So the Dutch brought slaves into Dutch Guyana, which is now known as Suriname. And so by about 1750, sugar was the most valuable commodity in the European trade. So Hawaii first shipped sugar out about close to 100 years later. As usual, Hawaii's way behind. Now the price of sugar is so low that you can't even grow it. We can't afford to grow it in Hawaii. So fructose consumption increased 25% from 1970 to 2000. So that's the reason why fructose was blamed for modern diseases. And so before we get into that, I'd just like to say this. I have a very good friend who's Dutch, and I constantly bring up, it's like, yeah, you guys were slave traders. And the other thing is that my wife is from South America. Suriname is right next to where she's from. Suriname was Dutch Guyana. My wife was from British Guyana, now known as just Guyana. So their whole economy was based upon sugar. Her father had to quit school like in third grade to go work in the sugarcane fields. If you ever wanted to get out of working in the sugarcane field, the only way to do that was education. So he made sure that my wife had a very good education. But it's a third world country. And when the British decided that they weren't making profits anymore, then Guyana became a liability. So what did they do? Oh, guess what? You can have your freedom. We grant you your freedom. But they didn't teach them how to have freedom. They didn't teach them how to run a government. So they ended up with a dictator. So my wife grew up under a dictatorship in a third world country. So sugar and profit has a lot to do with social issues, don't you think? So critics of high fructose corn syrup try to tell you that it causes weight gain because it affects appetite. And so all this stuff has been studied extensively. But here's what's happening. The consumption since 2000 of high fructose corn syrup has been declining. And what's happening with obesity and diabetes? They're still going way up, right? So consumption is going down, but you're blaming the two processes that keep going up on this consumption that's going down. It just doesn't make any sense. So most medical associations do not support the idea that high fructose corn syrup contributes more to obesity than any other sweetener. So I know this is stupid. It must have been late at night when I did this. But my wife does some weird things being from a third world country. When she's sick, she'll do one or maybe two of these things. One, she'll just eat salt, puts it in her hand and eats it. And the other thing she does is the same thing with honey. She makes some tea with lots of honey in it, or she just eats honey off of a spoon. And I've never seen her put honey on a dressing, on a wound, but that is what is being used for right now. So sterilize honey. And so here's the mechanism that they think that actually causes it to help with the wound healing process. But you got to make sure that it's sterilized, because bees go all over the place and they collect all kinds of toxic bacteria and everything. So anyway, it should be sterile. So they've done a couple of studies, small studies. In a study of 140 children, honey reduced nighttime coughing more than cough suppressants. And there's been several studies like that. So these third world ideas about health and stuff are not too far off as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so this is where it might seem to be controversial. And I'm going to do it anyway. First, I want you to think about, where do you guys get your information? So my son and his friends are all into health because they're all into MMA, which I don't get, and I just don't get it anyway. So you want to get really healthy and then have somebody beat up on you. Doesn't sound very healthy to me. But anyway, he's constantly asking me questions about nutrition and supplements especially. And I'm like, well, where'd you hear that? Oh, my friend. Where's your friend hear it? Oh, I think my other friend. Did anybody ever read anything that wasn't biased? And where did you get all this information? Ultimately, it comes down to Instagram or something. So the Pew Research Center is a nonprofit. What they try to do is find falsities and try to find the truth in politics and everything else. They found that 62% of the people get some or all their news from social media. And there was a group of scientists studied Twitter, and they found that fake news reaches people 35% more than real news. So here is a link to the Pew Research Center. And here's what they found, 2014. So they found that MSNBC was rated 85% liberal bias. Fox is 55% conservative bias. CNN, 46% liberal bias. PolitiFact, MSNBC 58% false, Fox 45% false, CNN 22% false. Here's another one you can go to. So guess what? The news that you're hearing is not necessarily the truth. So MSNBC is rated 85% liberal bias. What does that mean? They are not telling you what happened. They're telling you what happened the way a liberal would interpret what happened. In other words, they're interpreting it for you and giving it to you in a liberal bias. And Fox does the same thing, but give you a conservative bias. What made me look at this is like, being in academics, most of these people are screaming liberals. Me, I'm more of a scientist. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I grew up in Hawaii, and I've looked at the Democratic Party, and what have they done? They've totally enriched themselves. At the same time, they're blaming everything on the Republicans. Well, we don't have Republicans here. So they're just all in it for themselves. So I don't want someone to tell me what happened in their opinion. I just want to know what happened. So what I've found is that liberal people, they only want to watch liberal news. And conservative people, they only want to watch conservative news. So in effect, they're not interested in what really happened. What they want is people to tell them stuff the way they want to hear it. Something that matches their preconceived notions of why something happened. What you hear from liberals is like, oh, you can't stand that Fox. This is so so conservative and so biased. But then the stations they listen to are just as biased, if not more. So I'm not sure exactly what caused me to start going into this whole thing about gun control, but it doesn't make sense to me. I've been in the Army. I've shot everything. I think I was 10 years old. For my 10th birthday, my dad gave me a 20 gauge shotgun. We went out in the backyard and shot it. Comwella back then, everybody had guns. Everybody hunted. So here's just some ideas that I had. Do guns cause violence, or would the violence happen anyway? Does owning a gun make you safer, or does owning a gun make you more likely to be shot? Would a place with high crime cause more people to own guns? If so, a place with high crime would also have more guns. So then the anti-gun people are going to say, well, look, there's all these people with guns, that's causing the violence. And the pro-gun groups will say, well, that's because the citizens need guns because of all the violence. With strict gun laws prevent mass shootings and all this other stuff. Have you ever seen any data on this? No. They don't discuss this with data. It's all emotions and bias. So they don't really discuss, they argue. So I've had discussions with colleagues and friends, and it's like, they're saying, oh, we need stricter gun laws. We need stricter this and stricter that. And it's like, wait a minute. Do you even know what the laws are concerning guns in the state of Hawaii? And then they don't. So it's a fact-free issue. So then what about people who are familiar with guns, since those with military experience? Are they more likely to own a gun? What do they think? What about countries like Israel, where pretty much everybody has mandatory service? Should crazy people or felons have guns, or do they have rights too? Should the federal government dictate gun laws, or should states be able to decide on their own laws? Is the media and their hype responsible for inciting copycats and causing an increase in shootings? I think so. Is the media biased in presentation of data? Absolutely. So how big of a problem is it? Here's the number of fatalities by firearms throughout the years. Okay, look at the numbers over here. This is huge. Okay. So since 1968, 1.6 something million Americans were killed by guns. That's more than the accumulated deaths of Americans from all wars from the founding of the country more than 200 years ago. But then gun ownership in the United States is extremely high. But look, here's homicide rates over here versus how many guns there are, right? And so you look at some of these countries over here, oh, there's hardly any homicides. So I don't know what country that is right there. They don't really say. But then you look at all these ones with low homicide rates, it's like, wait a minute. What does this mean right here, Switzerland? Switzerland has a lot of guns, but their homicide rate is very small. Same with Finland. Then you look at Brazil, Russia, Chile, Estonia, Mexico, whatever, some of these over here. Not a lot of guns, but some of these countries look pretty frickin' dangerous, don't you think? And where's the United States in all of this? We have a huge amount of guns, but look at where we are right here. What the media would have you believe is that there's a correlation between homicides rates and the number of guns. This is how they would have you believe it, when in fact, is nowhere near that. Here's the firearms homicide rates for different countries. So they just put them all in order of increasing homicide rates. So here's the average over here, and here's the United States right there in green. So we're actually below the average. But here's what gun control people want to do. They want to compare the United States with these other countries, right? So if you look at the United States versus other high income countries, yeah, there's a lot of homicides over here. Okay. And so I'm going to try to get through this really, really quickly, because the point is not each individual detail. The point is, how do we tackle a situation as emotional as gun control? We do it with data, and we don't lie about it. Here's a couple of other interesting things. U.S. gun injuries and deaths, gun deaths, non-fatal gun injuries. Here's suicide, homicide, and other. Well, wait a minute. What the hell is this? 61% of all gun-related deaths is by suicide? And it's mostly males, right? What about mass shootings? So this is from Time Magazine. It was in 2017, before the Las Vegas massacre. So the media would have you believe that, oh my God, the massacres, the mass shootings is just going through the roof. Well, here it is, all the way back to, I can't even read that date right there.
I'm pretty sure it says 76.
Oh, really? Okay. Good eyes. So here's the number of them. Do you see a trend? Is it going up, going down? What is it doing? I don't see a trend there at all. Here's the number of people killed at each of these incidents. Is that number going up or down? To me, it looks like there's a slight increase in the number of fatalities, but the number of incidences is not going up, as the media would have you believe. And then, superimposed on this right here, this was the 10-year ban on assault rifles. And then Congress did not reauthorize this. Can you understand why? From here, there is a ban on assault rifles. And over here, they gave up on it. Because why? Didn't do anything. What the heck is an assault rifle? Well, here's a typical assault rifle. So people tend to think that assault rifles, well, they're made for killing people. Well, I mean, you could say that about any gun, not necessarily an assault rifle. So machine guns are totally illegal. All these assault rifles are just semi-automatics, just like a handgun or anything else. Pull the trigger, you get one round go off. Anything else has been illegal since 1934. And so the term assault rifle was probably coined by Adolf Hitler as war propaganda. There's a little bit of history over there. And it's really simply a style of gun. Oh, but it's made to kill people. Any gun could do that. Oh, but it has a pistol grip. It's like, so does a pistol, okay? I'll tell you what, I was in the Army. They gave us M16s, and there was a button you could flip the switch and make your M16 automatic. I would never do that. You know why? Because you run out of bullets really, really quickly. When are you most likely to get killed? When you don't have any bullets to defend yourself. So here's school shootings. They seem to be going up. My friends who are in, well, they're mostly retired, but they're on study groups and stuff like that. Yeah, I have friends that I talk with about this stuff that have really interesting insights. But why would somebody go to a school to shoot people? It's ridiculous because they're unlikely to get shot, at least not right away. And what people that are logical don't understand is that a pathological mass murder like that is not logical. They don't respond to the same stimuli that we would. They respond differently. So for them, the more people they take out before they get killed, the more their ego is gratified. And these are mostly happening in North America. That's a significant thing that, you know, we can't really quite figure that out. And so is it an issue for teenagers? Yes, it is. Here's a poll on teenagers. They're very worried about this stuff. And so the data is not available. Part of the reason for that, part of the reason for the Dickey Amendment in 1996 was that CDC was being supported, obviously, by federal money and everything. And they weren't looking at the data as data. They were biasing all of their stuff to be in favor of gun control. So people in Congress said, okay, you're going to do that. We're going to pass this amendment and the heck with you. But we really don't have a lot of information. So here's another problem. Here's people killed by firearms. Here's people killed by motor vehicle accidents. And if you look at the funding that goes to it, gun violence hardly gets any funding. You're not giving money to study it. Well, that would give us data, right? So here's some other place you can look. Let's see. So here's an interesting thing. Does owning a gun protect you from violence? In 2014, there was 5.9 million violent crimes in the US, with 10% of the offenders using a visible firearm. A survey of 18,000 prison inmates incarcerated for a violent crime found that 30% of state offenders and 35% of federal offenders carried a firearm when they committed their crimes. And here's the other thing. This is old data from 2000. Civilians use guns to defend themselves or another person almost 1 million times a year. I bet you've never heard that fact before. Americans use guns to frighten away home intruders 500,000 times a year. So that's the other side of it. So here I talked about where criminals get their guns. I looked at that. Here I talked about the NRA. So gun control arguments, there's lots of things we could talk about, but here's something I found that really kind of exemplifies what anti-gun people say. They take countries, they pick and choose the countries, and they compare us to them. So what they're saying is that, oh, our mental health is very, very bad. We don't put money into mental health. Then they say, our culture is very violent, right? We watch shows and TV shows and movies and stuff. They're always killing each other. Okay. And then they say, well, easy access to guns. So this plus this and this gives you the worst possible combination. But going back to the culture, who watches American-made movies? Like everybody in the world, right? So how would that be? Yeah. Then access to guns, yeah, there's other countries where it's easy access to guns, but sometimes they feel like they don't need it. Why would I need one? So just to show you how bad it can be, I was actually looking for something more redneck when I'm looking for the other side, and I found this thing over here. This is pretty funny. So what they did is they looked at the FBI statistics for gun violence. So in the areas where you see blue right here, there's high levels of gun violence. And then here's the 2012 voting pattern. The places in blue were heavily for Obama. And what do you see? Oh yeah, there's a big correlation there. Obama causes gun violence. So in other words, data can be made to support anything. So they did a survey, Time Magazine did a survey. Actually, no, they didn't. It was Pew Research Center did a survey and Time Magazine published it. So should we prevent people with mental illness from purchasing guns? It was almost the same, right? Anti-gun and pro-gun people, pretty much the same. Should we prevent people on the no-fly or watch list from purchasing a gun? Similar, right? Almost the same. Should there be background checks? Yeah, pretty close. Should there be a national database to track all gun sales? Now you're getting into a situation where the anti-gun control people, their mentality is, yeah, you guys want to come and take our guns away. So as soon as you start getting to that area, there's not good agreement anymore. So gun control measures usually increase gun sales. When Trump got elected, gun sales went way down because people were like, oh, they're not going to take our guns anymore. And anyway. So let's see. I don't even know what I want to say over there. So I looked at the people who shoot and do bad things, and I put them into different categories. This is my own take on it. So there's criminal shooters, suicidal shooters, crazy shooters, right? And just to try to analyze it a little bit. And yeah, it's kind of interesting what you come up with. So I'm not going to read everything, but then I also took the national data and I just tried to figure out a few things. So what I did is I took this data and I put it into 5 different categories depending upon the strictness of the laws in that particular state. So with the weakest laws, there's about half the states, and this is their gun-related deaths per 100,000. It's about 13.9. A little bit stronger laws, there's only 2 states to compare, not that much of a decrease. Stronger ones, and even the strongest. So yeah, you could probably, with super strong laws, maybe cut it in half. Okay. So in Hawaii, we have very strong gun laws. Here's gun ownership versus gun deaths by state. So you can see Hawaii is way down here. And yeah. So I put a lot of stuff in here about Hawaii. Here's gun registrations versus the year. And by the way, with the latest in happenings in our own state with the COVID virus and everything, gun sales are through the roof in Hawaii right now. People are afraid. So here's violent crimes committed with firearms, that's the dark blue. And here's all violent crimes with weapons. So in Hawaii, guns not used that much in crimes. 2018, we had 8 murders with guns, 5 with knives. 107 robberies with guns, 85 with knives. 128 assaults with guns, 364 with knives. So then I kind of went through my own stuff, what I think we should do. And anyway, that's what the data shows. So I'm not trying to tell you yes or no. I'm just trying to show you the data. So here's rhetoric or humor. And here's kind of where we're at right here. So here's the top 10 killers in the United States. 48% is tobacco related. 17% medical error. That's right. So we have unintentional injuries, in other words, accidents. We have alcohol, accidental poisoning, drug abuse, falls, non-gun homicides, and look at gun homicides. All of our attention gets over here, and I don't know, just got to put it in perspective. And I wasn't going to record this, but I guess I did anyway. What about racism and police brutality? So here's the reason. Here's life expectancy, loss in days of life expectancy according to age, right? For white people and for black people. That's disproportionate. Okay. So here is suicide by firearms. Oh, white people are disproportionate. So are police shootings racist? Or most police trying to do their best? So here's shootings by race. This is 2015 from the Census Bureau. And so here's shot by police in 2016. White, black, That's other. Here's Hispanic. And this one is unknown. That's Asian, okay? So about twice as many people are shot by police that are white compared to black. Here's another piece of data, and here's the population. So 61%, about 61.6% of the population is white, but that's kind of disproportionate. But if you look at black people, well, that's a factor of 2 right there, isn't it? Okay. So here's race of those killed by police: whites, blacks, and Hispanic. And here's race of those who feloniously kill police: white and black. Wait a minute. So this and this is about the same. So there doesn't seem to be any prejudice right here in terms of this analysis. What about blacks? Blacks kill police more than police kill them. Here's from New York City. Here's percentage of by race of criminal shooters. So 72% of the shooters in New York City were black, compared to 3% white. Here's percentage by race of perpetrators firing on police. Okay. I don't know. Here's percentage by race of perpetrators killed by police. Okay, looking at Hispanic, it looks pretty even. Looking at white, it's like, wait a minute. Way more white people are killed compared to the amount of criminal shooters. And it's kind of the opposite of what you would expect, don't you think? So again, I'm just showing you data. So I have a niece who lives in New York. She's 19 years old. She's half black and she's half Indian. And since moving to New York from Guyana, she's identified with being black. And we've talked about, I need to go buy a gun because the cops are going to shoot me. I'm like, no. If you buy a gun, you're more likely to get shot. That's the issue right there. But anyway, she was listening to the media and she's just scared to death. And I'm trying to talk her out of all this stuff. So here's the good news, if there is any. Shooting by police is decreasing for all races. So here's African Americans younger than 25. Look at this. This is 1968, 69. It was extremely dangerous to be an African American below 25 years old back in these days. I was in the Army during this period of time, and I saw a lot of interesting stuff. And if you look at all other races, okay, it's just a low, steady rate. Same thing over here. And then here's African Americans that are older. It's still high, it's unacceptable. But the good news is that both of these are going down. You could Google this. I won't even say anything about it except maybe Google that. See what comes up. It goes right back to my thing about violence and guns and everything else. It's drug related. It's gang related. This is all gang stuff right here. If you take away the incentive, which is money by selling drugs and prostitution and all that kind of stuff, then maybe all that stuff would stop. So here's some correlation between violent crimes and the population of Black and Hispanic. Okay, there's a correlation. violent crime versus percent in poverty. That's a correlation that adds to this. Percent unemployed, percent that didn't complete high school. You take these trends and put them together, I think you get this. So if you really want to reduce the problems with crime and everything, it's like these are the issues right here. And this whole thing about defunding police departments and stuff like that. Well, defunding is kind of a bad name. And I just don't see where that's going to go. But here's another piece of information here. Police violence and community violence are independent issues. So here's what they did. They took various cities that had high crime rates, and they simply put them in order of the highest police killing rates to the lowest. Then they came back and they said, okay, what are the violent crime rates in those cities? So here they're pretty close, here they're close. Some places they're actually very far away. But is there a correlation between police killing and violent crime rates in that city? And the answer is no, there's not a correlation. So what should you be looking at? If you wanted to solve this problem, you want to find a place where the police killings are high, where the violent crimes don't match that. That would help you find out where there's extra resources needed to go and things like that. And again, I just think it's poverty and the whole thing about illegal drugs, giving incentives to gangs and everything else. And that's my issue. Okay, so we should be done by 3. So I saw this in the newspaper. I'm like, oh my God, that actually happened to us. So my wife, who's like 105 pounds, was pushing the shopping cart in Costco. And we hear these 2 girls, they're just loud girls, obviously mainland girls. And they're just screaming, oh, these people in Hawaii are so slow. And they're like, just going around people with their carts and everything. Well, sure enough, they come up in our aisle. And the next thing I know, they had bumped my wife in the heel with their cart. I don't know if you ever had that happen. That hurts, you know? And my wife just turns around and smacks her. And this girl was twice the size of my wife. And I'm like, oh my God, chick fight, you know? But we're just louder and more boisterous. These Hawaii people are terrible, this and that. Anyway, people that disrespect other people like that is like, yeah, why do people do that? I mean, it's just crazy. So is there a genetic basis for violence? And I just find this extremely interesting. So in 1962, a Dutchman documented his family's history of violence going back to the 1870s. Then a woman from that family said, oh my God, I'm worried about my son, her brothers. And so she started to look for help. So geneticists found a defect in the gene for monoamine oxidase A. This is an enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. So if these neurotransmitters are too high, the person can lose control and react violently and impulsively. In 2011, they found another gene variant that regulates dopamine. was connected to homicidal behavior. And they found that prison inmates often had the monoamine oxidase variant, where it was just higher in incidence in that subpopulation. So people with illnesses are 2 to 3 times more likely to become violent. You can look at people's MRIs and you can see that oftentimes you can actually look at the MRIs and predict which is the criminal and which is not. So there are changes in the brain. And there have been cases in court where the defense was, it wasn't my fault, my gene defect caused me to do it. But in effect, while genes influence behavior, they simply do not govern or determine it. So I don't know if you guys know who Jim Jeffries is. He's a comedian. He's hilarious. And he has 2 YouTube videos on gun control. It's hilarious, actually. Really kind of mind-opening. So I just love this cartoon. And I love this one over here. So you know how they were going to train teachers how to have guns, right? Yeah. The kindergarten one. So that's it. In terms of violence, I just want to say one thing. So I have a friend, Gino, which we don't really hang out much anymore. He's older than me. And I remember one of the last times I hung out with Gino, and he went to prison for assault, and the guy is a badass dude. But he's just so quick to violence, and he's so short-tempered. Anyway, one of the last times we were hanging out, we were at my friend's shop down in Kaka'ako. It was getting dark. And some guy was driving by in a pickup truck. And obviously, he's like driving like this, and he's looking around like he's looking for something. And Gino just runs out there like, what you looking at? And in much worse language than that. And I had to go out there and drag him away. It's like, Gino, what are you doing? The guy's just looking for something. And Gino was about close to 70 at the time. And it started making me think about people like Gino. If you go back to the original days, we were hunters and gatherers. We're wandering around. You have some people who know where to go. They followed the prey. They know where to go. These are like the original scientists. And you got people that you want in front of you, like the Ginos of our world. Because if there's a saber-toothed tiger, who do you want to confront the saber-toothed tiger? You want Gino in the front. Crazy. So we have gene variation within our population. They had different specializations. And now our society is much different. And all the people like Gino are basically in prison now. Before, they had a purpose for survival of our species, and now they don't. So anyway, my whole purpose here was to make you think about things and look at things in a scientific manner, and then mistrust anything that comes to you on social media, even on the news. I really cannot stand to watch Fox News. I mean, it's really kind of the presentation style. It's just like, it's like Worldwide Wrestling Federation or something like that. And it's obviously some of it is just like so biased. And then I really hate to look at MSNBC and stuff like that. because they're really subtle in how they present their biases to you. Well, Fox News is like that, but we're like this, we're smarter, we're better. And you know what? They're just as biased as anybody else. So when I watch the news, when I read the newspaper, I just want to know what happened. What happened? And then I'll decide how I think why it happened. I don't want somebody telling me what happened and then why it happened. Because they're giving you it in their own bias. As a scientist, we spend our careers trying to not look at things with bias. I remember we were looking at in the microscope for a long time about when we're watching cells move around. We were looking at stem cells. We were looking at marine sponge cells, how they would reaggregate and move around and divide and all this kind of stuff. And we're trying to teach our students that, no, don't anthropomorphize. Don't like put your concept of behavior onto a cell. They're like, well, the cells are doing this. It's like, how do you know? Just keep watching. Document it. Don't put your bias onto what the cells are doing by thinking of that they're acting like a human or something. So when we're observing in science, we try to be unbiased from our religion, from our race, from even our species, so that we actually can just get a good, clean observation of what it is that's happening. So, anyway, I wasn't planning on taking a whole session on this, but I guess I did. So any questions about anything? Okay.
If when I'm older, I'm going to make a news like station that's like completely unbiased, called The Good News.
Good news is already biased.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean in terms of like unbiasedness, that's why they're good.
Yeah.
Professor, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Do you think it's hard to get the truth out of media and social media? You really have to make your own decision, as you mentioned. But do you think most of the country believes what they see on TV?
I think a lot of them do. Unfortunately, a lot of them do. I mean, when my niece was on social media, like, oh, I'm going to get a gun because I'm black and they're going to come shoot me. I'm like, who's going to shoot you? The police. Like, what? Come on, give me a break.
Yeah.
They come into my house, I'm going to shoot them. It's like, yeah, and then you're going to get shot and then you're going to go to jail. Because these are sworn officers, they're upholding the law, and maybe they make mistakes, but anyway, you're going to get yourself killed. And but she believes all this stuff. I mean, she's only 19, she's kind of gullible, she's from a third world country, but I have other people that I know, and I look at their Facebook pages and I'm like, oh my God, what is happening to them? They're becoming Trump followers, and they're anti-vaxxers, and they hear something and they actually believe it. And I'm trying to explain to them, it's like, that's not the data. There's other websites I go to is about, Hawaiian culture and stuff like that. And they're like, there's this rant going on about the military people coming here and they don't have to go through quarantine like everybody else does. I'm like, yes, they do. And then no matter what you tell them, they come right back to, the military. So you know how the military doesn't have to quarantine? It's like now it becomes fact in their mind. It's like, it's not even fact. It's just ridiculous. But you know where you get a better perspective on what goes on in America is from non-American news media like BBC. And I used to love to watch Al Jazeera America, but then now it's gone. But yeah, I don't know how
certainly looking towards sites like the CDC or the Bureau of Justice Statistics can give you a better idea of what the numbers actually are.
Yeah, and the Pew Research Center and those other ones I mentioned, their whole thing is to undo bias and to look at the facts.
I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so I have a question in regards of like, especially with like, leaders and stuff like in our country, how are we supposed to vote? I mean, obviously I'm asking for like a political opinion. I'm just saying like, because I feel like leaders nowadays, like you have to be either one party or the other. You can't really expect to win if you're an independent. So how are you going to see like, people who actually think and because if you don't like, follow that party, then, you're not going to have that base and,
right.
kind of a predicament.
So many young people don't vote, but then they complain. It's like, well, did you vote? No, I didn't know who to vote for. I didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything. So that's the problem. And over the last 10, 15 years, whatever, we saw the Republican Party turn into the far religious right. So how did that happen? Well, people with their right-wing religious ideas went into the party and changed the party. So that's another possibility. If enough people go into a party, they'll end up changing the party.
That's true.
I remember, growing up in Hawaii, my parents were Republicans. It's like, what? And my mom was actually I forget the title, but co-chairman or something like that of the Republican Party. And you look at all their friends and political activists in those days, I'm talking the 60s, they were Hawaiians, they were Filipinos, they were all these minorities that didn't have a voice in society and government. And so they couldn't get power with the Democratic Party, so they were in the Republican Party. But then slowly, as soon as they got influence, they moved back into the Democratic Party and changed it somewhat. But politics ebbs and flows. It moves all around. It's not something that's just static. You know what I mean? It can be changed. Totally.
Definitely.
And Hawaii is a good place to do that.
Interesting.
Yeah, you got to do something. You can't wait for someone else to do it.
Yeah.
So I have a student, he's a little bit of an oddball. But it's a couple of years ago, he wanted to run for something. I don't know what he ran for. I think it was mayor or something, I forget. And so he needed some signatures. So I said, well, let's ask the class. So he goes up in front of the class and I need so many signatures so I can get my name on the ballot and everything. And so he got enough students to sign the ballot. And he was on the ballot. I got to vote for him. He got maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 votes, I forget. But, it just goes to show you that you can actually get involved in the process. And he is an oddball. But anyway. So I guess we're out of time. And so you guys think I should record this and put this up or not? I'm not that interested in getting attacked by lawyers and racist or whatever. What do you guys think?
I don't think it was too bad. I mean, it wasn't very. I mean, it was very stick to the facts. So I don't see like it being an issue. I guess it is like a hot topic, but it's a hot topic, but like I don't think it was very because you literally just stuck to the facts.
Yeah, I tried to. Okay, I'll put it up and see what happens. Not mandatory to watch this video. Okay, folks. Well, you guys have a great day. And we'll do something tomorrow, I think at noon. Okay?
Thanks, Professor.
Okay, you
Sounds
guys
good.
have a great day. Take care.
You too.